In a world where detective stories have grasped the literary scene like no other, it's no surprise that they would eventually make their entry into the video game medium. And over the many years it's existed, a lot of games have been conceptualized and released based around this genre of gameplay. Games that utilize the idea of solving a mystery and finding clues to nail the conclusion. Some are based on real-life detective stories, and some are entirely new. Some are spin-offs, and some overarch into their own series. But no matter the circumstance, detective games are usually fun and in plentiful numbers as well, but it seems this is especially so on the DS line of handhelds. And it's no wonder, with the capabilities of the DS line such as the touchscreen and built-in microphone, it makes sense that these games would own heavy territory on the platform. In fact, the DS is even well known for housing some of these games such as Ghost Trick Phantom Detective and Ace Attorney. And this continued onto the 3DS with continuations of series from the DS and standalone titles like James Noir's Hollywood Crimes. Whoever the fuck that is. And on both of these platforms, one series that I think nails it down from an outsider's perspective is Professor Layton. Other than Ace Attorney, Professor Layton is probably the most well-known adventure series that utilizes the premise of a detective. But how does it hold up to a first-time player in 2022? Well, that's what we're gonna find out today. My name is dehparticles, and in today's video, I'm gonna give my thoughts on Professor Layton's first game, Professor Layton and the Curious Village. So the way that Professor Layton works is actually relatively simple. Throughout the game, you'll be controlling the titular Professor Layton and his assistant Luke as they navigate the town of St. Mystere. Very subtle. Moving through this town functions like a classic point-and-click adventure title. Since the only control function of the game is through the use of the touchscreen, most of the game is played with the use of a stylus. And it's with the stylus that you can move around by pressing an icon and clicking an arrow in the direction you want to travel. But besides moving your character, you can also interact with the environment around you by inspecting items and talking to NPCs. Most of the time, the NPCs you talk to will give you puzzles to try during your journey, and the same can happen when inspecting items, but more often than not you get additional dialogue or hint coins to use during puzzles. And that's the kicker here. There are a lot of puzzles in the Curious Village, so much so that you basically have to enjoy doing them in order to have fun with the game. So, best prepare some brain fuel. There are many different kinds of puzzles, ranging from pretty simple to a bit tricky, and each one is presented with its value in what's known as pickerots. When doing a puzzle, you have unlimited time to solve it, and you're given max 3 available hints per puzzle. The game encourages you to think as much as possible to get the puzzle correct, but if by chance you get it wrong, you'll lose a set amount of pickerots that you can obtain in the end. But not to worry. Although some puzzles are mandatory for progression, you can always come back to others if you're stuck. And if you complete a chapter before finding a puzzle, it'll be added into the town's puzzle shack, which you can revisit later. Other than main gameplay functions, you can also find additional features in the professor's trunk, acting as a menu of additional functions. There's the journal and mysteries sections, which contain basic rundowns of the story up to date. The puzzle index, which allows you to replay any puzzles you've encountered in the chapter. Gizmos and painting, where you can assemble a contraption and portrait based on items you get from puzzles. The inn, where you can design Layton and Luke's lodgings over time, and saving the game. Based on some of these alone, the game offers enough replayability amidst experiencing the story and should prove fun for any invested player. But that's basically the gist of the gameplay. Now it's time to go over the story of the Curious Village's plot. Before we do though, there will obviously be spoilers for the game, so skip to this part of the video to move on to my thoughts. Otherwise, you have been warned. Starting the game opens to a cutscene of the English gentleman, Professor Layton, driving to a village named St. Mystere with his assistant Luke after receiving a letter from a certain Lady Dahlia. The letter describes a treasure known as the Golden Apple, mentioned in the will of the late Baron Augustus Reinhold, of which the townsfolk have led and failed a search for. Entering the village, Layton and Luke notice that the townsfolk are rather into puzzles and mysteries, of which they're knowledgeable at solving. Of course. But also a large ominous tower standing tall on one side of town that no one can seem to get to. Regardless, Layton and Luke make their way to the mansion where they meet Lady Dahlia and other family members, but their conversation is cut short when a loud noise scares the family cat. When they return having retrieved the cat, they discover that the mansion is now the scene of a murder, and while the inspector of the case initially suspects Layton and Luke, they're eventually told to back off. Later on, the duo find out that this inspector is an imposter named Don Paulo, an evil scientific genius who has a mysterious vendetta against Layton. Whilst continuing their search for the golden apple, they witness the kidnapping of one of Dahlia's servants, yet are confused to see him return the next day with no recollection of the event. They believe it has something to do with the tower, which they instinctively go to only to be led to an abandoned amusement park by a strange woman. Don Paulo catches wind of their activity in the amusement park and sabotages a Ferris wheel which Layton and Luke escape. In the ensuing wreckage after the Ferris wheel crashes, Layton and Luke find an entrance to the sewers which they explore to find a key resembling the tower, thereby finally having the means to enter it. When they do, they cave into the floor and meet the same man who kidnapped Dahlia's servant, who reveals that all the citizens of St. Mystere are actually just robots created to test the knowledge of those seeking the golden apple, a plot point which not only shocked me finding out, but also doubles as an existential crisis. With all this new information at hand, the duo make their way up the tower, solving puzzles and mysteries faster than you can fire darts at a dartboard.
Unbelievable!
And when they finally reach the top, there lies a cottage with a well-lit room. Inside the room is the woman from before who reveals herself to be the golden apple all along, Flora Reinhold, but their meeting is short-lived as Don Paulo returns and begins to demolish the tower, but thankfully they escape. Professor Layton soon notices an apple birthmark on Flora's shoulder that acts as a hint that there's more to the Baron's treasure than just Flora, as evident by a portrait with a secret button in the Reinhold manor. Behind the portrait is a room filled with the Baron's fortune, with a voice message stating that when it's taken, all the robots in the village will cease to function. However, Flora opts to leave it be as a way of saying thanks to those who cared for her in St. Mystere, and the ending shows her leaving with Layton and Luke as they say goodbye to St. Mystere and hint towards the next adventure in the Professor Layton series. So yeah, that's the basic rundown of the story. There were some details I skimmed over because I think they're better to experience in the actual game itself, but hopefully I didn't miss any important information or go too fast. But you know what is fast? This transition. Now with everything that's been said, my thoughts on the individual game itself were pretty positive throughout my playthrough. The first thing I want to talk about is the graphics. Of course, with a game like Professor Layton, the graphics aren't something that necessarily make or break it, but thankfully Level 5 did a good job with them. It's not groundbreaking, but they suit the theme of the game well, with backgrounds and artwork that are skillfully drawn and character designs that are memorable as you progress through the story. You wouldn't remember any ordinary townsman if you looked like your average guy, so to see Level 5 step it up as much as they did made playing the game all the more interesting. Additionally, it was always refreshing to see the animated and fully voice-acted cutscenes in between the story moments as well, showing the vibrance that makes St. Mystere a memorable location in the game. With that said though, the DS version doesn't exactly show everything in the best way. The limited size of the touchscreen often makes everything look blurry or pixelated, something that might prove especially bothersome with the cutscenes. Thankfully, an HD port on mobile exists that improves the quality of the graphics for those keen on a better looking experience, but regardless, the overall consensus is that the art aids the presentation of the game. The presence of audio, whether it be voice acting or the original soundtrack, can't be understated either. In total, Professor Layton and the Curious Village is composed of 25 different songs in its OST, which use a Western European influence reminiscent of the setting of the game. I don't know if I can remember hearing all of the songs throughout my playthrough, but those I did hear are ones that are still stuck in my head even while editing this video. Songs like the nighttime theme and the puzzle-solving background music are ones that stood out to me and gave St. Mystere more vibrance in its setting while simultaneously fitting in with the art style and puzzle sections of the game. Although, with such a small soundtrack, the consistent repetition of certain songs might make them stale over time, like you're in a carnival of hell for all eternity. But in my playthrough, this is only something I noticed slightly. Even if the songs do repeat for a long time, they're pretty calming to listen to, so you'll feel relaxed while playing the game. What's more, the voice acting, with what little there is in the game, is done superbly. In the English dub, the performances of Christopher Robin Miller as Professor Layton and Lonnie Minella as Luke, along with other main characters that get voice acting, allow for some excellent portrayals of the characters. It's honestly surprising that 2 people can do this much to a single video game, let alone multiple characters, and I can't wait to see how they fare in the next one. And if the OST and voice acting is incredible in this one, it not only brings excitement for the next adventure, but makes me want to review the highlights from this one as well. When reviewing the game itself, I made sure to notice the aspects of the gameplay like when I talked about it earlier, and I found that most of it is spent doing puzzles instead of actually being in the map. Even if you try to progress without solving any puzzles, you'll eventually hit some sort of puzzle requirement that forces you to complete any you may find. As mentioned earlier, the puzzles you find in the Curious Village range from somewhat easy to holy shit, I spent an hour of my life on this, difficult. Now realistically, the difficulty of the game depends on the person. Someone who's more used to doing puzzles and similar tasks won't have a difficult time getting through Curious Village, but the average player will likely get stuck on a handful of them. The kinds of puzzles you find in the Curious Village range from ones such as, do it in as few moves as possible, do it with some mathematics, do it, or can you? What if this is a possible answer? And one player might prove better at some puzzles than others, but generally, there will always be one part of the game where you might prove stuck, so if you're not really a fan of puzzle solving, then this game might not be for you. And unfortunately, the Curious Village doesn't make a whole lot of room for replayability. Of course, with Granny Riddleton's Puzzle Shack, you can always revisit and solve puzzles you missed out on through the story, and discover many more as well. And based on whether or not you're going for 100% completion, you can unlock additional puzzle houses that have some of the trickiest puzzles, I've said that so many times now, in the game, and even a mysterious door that can only be unlocked with a hint from the next game, the Diabolical Box. In addition, you can also complete optional objectives such as assembling the painting and completing the gizmo, and once you finish the game, you can revisit art pieces, cutscenes, and many more based on the number of Pickerots you obtain through your playthrough. Other than that though, the most you can get out of replaying the Curious Village is little to none. By then the story is complete and you'll have mostly everything known. So if you're looking to do more with the game, you won't find a whole lot. But for the current prices you can find the game at, it's cheap enough that you don't necessarily need a lot of replayability to enjoy it. So the features that we're left with are pretty nice additions. And thankfully, the Curious Village is a game that can be found somewhat easily in 2022. The version I'm using for this video is the original DS version, which I believe plays the best, and from what I've seen, most secondhand results go for pretty cheap. However, for new players, I'd recommend trying out the HD port on mobile I mentioned earlier, which is essentially the same game plus some quality of life improvements and bonus features, both of which improve on some of the issues present in the DS version. And at $9.99 on its own, it's definitely a steal of a deal and probably the best way to introduce yourself to the Professor Layton series at large. In conclusion, Professor Layton and the Curious Village exceeded my expectations and was a great and pleasant game to play. Not only is the game aided in experience through the many aspects of its presentation, but its story is an easy to understand tale that twists in ways that ramp up investment and interest. And any issues that I noticed present were not enough to sway me away from the game at all, which makes the Curious Village a promising entry into the Professor Layton series. Now of course, with the primary aspect of the game being the puzzles, it's certainly not for everyone, but the Curious Village has enough in store to make it a great entry-level puzzle title that anyone can enjoy. And I think that's why people became attached to it in the first place. It emphasizes the aspect of anyone and everyone, with input from the player being used to solve mysteries and puzzles as opposed to watching what happens in front of you. And with this kind of gameplay in tow, Professor Layton and the Curious Village stands out as not only one of the highlights of the DS library, but the detective gaming genre as well. And if the next game continues in the same manner as this one, I can't wait to see what's next in store for our top hat friend. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that it got you into Professor Layton as well. I'm very excited to be back making more videos, but since things will be busy for at least another 2 months, I can't commit to a schedule, let alone predict when the next one will come out. But I hope you stick around. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to my channel, it really helps me out. And if you want channel updates, be sure to click the notification bell and check out my Twitter. My previous video on Frog Detective is also on screen and in the description, so please be sure to check that out as well. Otherwise, that's it from me. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye now.